Hey YouTube, this is the second episode of the InkThePodcast podcast, and today I'm here with Christian Pearson of PopCross Studios. That is all I have to say, and I hope you enjoy the video. Who is Christian Pearson?
Christian Pearson is, I guess, a YouTube illustrator and not so much animator anymore, but I used to work as an animator. Now I focus mostly on storytelling and drawing illustrations, mainly focusing on pop culture crossovers, taking characters from something like the Avengers and turning them into dragons,
Like
or taking
mashups.
characters, mashups, fusions, that kind of stuff.
Now, Christian, you've got a phenomenal and a very distinct art style with your big hands and big limbs and stuff. How do you go about finding it, and how do you think people should go about finding theirs?
It's definitely a slow process and has evolved a lot. Where it originally started was I worked on I self-published, illustrated, and wrote a book series a few years back called Multiverse Tales. And at the
Mm-hmm.
time when I was making that, I wasn't good enough as an artist to do the comic booky style that I wanted. So I leaned into a cartoonier style that I kind of liked, where characters had really big forearms and hands and feet, and it was a simplified version of a comic booky kind of character. And then I started really liking those elements of the cartoonified style. So when I started improving and getting to a point where I could do more comic booky stuff, I made a sort of blend of some of my favorite modern day comic book artists,
Mm-hmm.
along with that sort of big hands and big feet kind of style, and just always pulling inspiration from different artists that I really like, going on things like YouTube and seeing if they have any videos talking about their process and how they make their styles. So I've picked little pieces up from lots of different artists I like Derek Laufman, Dan Mora Chavez. Always forget, there's a channel that I learned how to do a large part of my coloring style from. I always forget the name of, and it'll probably take me too long to remember it. So I'll just say there was a channel that I really liked their coloring tutorials. Oh, also Color with Kurt is a really great coloring
Mm-hmm.
channel. He colors comic book art professionally. So yeah, it really is just a slow
It's a
process that's taken
combination of
years.
artists you like and your style.
Yeah, exactly. I've found a way to take little pieces from lots of different people and put it together into a final package that I really, really like.
Combine them to make something original.
Yeah.
Now, what's the deal behind your name, PopCross Studios? I've always wondered this. What does PopCross mean?
So it comes from pop culture crossover, because that's the core of the kind of art that I do on the channel. And it actually originally was going to be for a podcast, funny enough. I'd made these three big lists of types of characters from pop culture. One was heroes, one was kind of sidekicks, and one was villains. And I was going to, for the podcast, randomly generate a character from each list and try to write a story on the fly, or like explain the story on the fly in the podcast with whoever my guest was. And I still kind of like the idea of trying that at some point,
I was like,
but
great idea.
yeah, thanks. I thought it would be fun, but the people that I was bringing on to work, I tried out an episode with a friend and he wasn't really super into it. So I was just kind of like, once I started my YouTube channel, I just kind of threw PopCross Studios on there because I liked the name, and I didn't plan on keeping it as the name long term. But once the channel started taking off, I was like, well, people know this as PopCross Studios, so I guess I should just stick with it.
I feel like a lot of people these days worry and stress about trying to find their art style. Do you think that worrying is justified, or should they, spend their time on more important stuff like trying to improve their art in general? Personally, I think that they shouldn't stress that much about their art style. I don't think it's that important.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that will just develop over time, and also depending on the kind of job you want in the art world, it's more or less important depending on that job. Because if you want to work with
Mm-hmm.
something at something like an animation studio, you have to be able to adapt to their
Got
art
to get the
style.
cartoony animation art style.
Yeah. So and that's not even just an animation company. Like lots of different companies people would want to work for. You have to try and adapt to the style that they want, not just bring your own in. And there will likely be times where you can work in your own style, but the only time where your own art style is really important is if you do something like what I do. You're working for yourself
Trying to
and
grow
you
on the internet
develop.
and be different.
Pardon?
And trying to grow on the internet and be different. You need to look different. You need to be different.
Yeah. Yeah, you need something distinct. But yeah, an art style is something that will develop over time and likely change over time.
Mm.
You'll discover new artists that you like, and you go, "Oh, I maybe want to pull a little bit of inspiration from them, change up how I draw this part of the
Take from
character."
this artist, take from this artist.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just as you're working on your stuff, you'll realize I pulled inspiration for how I draw this part of a character from this other artist, but I think I've just discovered that I like doing things this way, that you're not even taking it from another artist. You've just realized that you've developed a way to draw a certain part in a way that you like.
Hmm. What's the worst piece of art advice you've ever heard? The single worst piece.
Oh, the worst piece. Would be hard for me to think up. The first thing that jumps to mind that isn't really advice. Well, I guess it kind. I know I heard it a few times at my school, and I've seen lots of other people talk about it online. Of art teachers saying, "Don't draw anime style" or "Don't draw manga"
Yes,
and
people
stuff
complain
like
about that all the time about art teachers and art
that. Yeah,
school people.
and there's a slight element to that that I get, where if you just try working with that art style right off the bat, then you don't necessarily properly learn how to draw different elements of
Won't learn the
characters.
anatomy and the body and the characters correctly if you just
Yeah,
follow the
yeah.
anime style the entire time.
Yeah, but that's also just something you could apply to someone trying to learn any art style before doing anatomy classes. So I don't think if someone's end goal is to make anime or manga, then they definitely should just keep learning how to do that. I mean,
Drawing anime.
don't avoid the fundamentals, but yeah, I've always not been a fan of that art advice, I guess.
Personally, the worst piece of art advice I've ever heard was draw every day. You might think that's controversial or something, but it's just going to lead to art block and burnout, and it's just a bad idea overall.
I could see that. Yeah. I think it depends on the person. There have been times where I drew every day and I just didn't really think about it. It was just built into my routine. But like even now, I'm working professionally and 5 days a week I'm drawing lots. And then on my weekends, I very rarely draw anything because it's just such a big part of my work week that I don't really feel like I need to do it on weekends.
Hmm. Quick last question. I was just trying to check
Cool.
the time because my timer wasn't working. A quick last question. Should people try new stuff, as in cartoons and stuff, or should they try to stick to one thing?
I think it's always good to try branching out. I mean, it is something that, I mean, I guess I use this answer a lot for things, but it depends on the person and what their end goal is. For instance, it can help people grow as an artist if you frequently do realistic and you jump over and try to do cartoony. You can see what areas you might need to learn how to do something else better in. That wasn't a well structured sentence. But yeah, like personally, I don't practice realism very often because it just doesn't interest me that much in
Hmm.
terms of creating that kind of artwork. But I know that if I do one day sit down and try some realism, it will probably help me develop
Improve
some things for my regular art style. So it is a
the
good thing
anatomy
to
and the
do.
shading and the rendering.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's definitely helpful, and a good thing to do, especially earlier on in your art learning, because then you might discover like, oh, I actually like realism more than cartoony stuff, and
10
then you can.
seconds left.
Okay, yeah, that was pretty much the end of the thought anyway.
Okay. Thank you for coming, Christian. It's been an honor having you on the podcast.
Oh, no
I've really
problem.
enjoyed this time. And thanks for watching. And as you can see, I've been peacefully and pleasantly painting in the background while you've been listening to this podcast. And now it's finally time to show you the final product. I hope you enjoy the reveal.